Rich, welcome to the Founders Lounge.
Thank you for having me.
So I always do a quick, like a one sentence kind of intro of every guest, and then obviously you can correct me if I got anything wrong. But I think in your case, the things that you're kind of known for is you ran and sold two agencies when I think you were still pretty young at that point, and then started and sold a cocktail startup. So we'll hear about what that's all about. And I think now you're mostly investing in startups. So I think you personally invested in probably like 20, 30, maybe more startups. You started a fund. And you occasionally charter a super yacht in Croatia. So that sounds like fun. Is that
Literally
about
hit the
right?
nail on the head. Hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, fantastic. I don't need. There's a mic drop. I don't need to be here now.
Nice. No, but I don't know any of the details really. So what's actually the story behind the agencies, right? I don't completely understand how that started and how that all. I think you were doing that for about 3 years. But yeah, how did it all started actually? What's the story?
Yeah, I mean, look, I started my career in London about 12 and a half years ago. I was a very early employee into a publishing business. I won't speak too much about that because it was a very rocky period, and I was very young at the time. And for whatever reason, the business was in a little bit of financial difficulty, and I was thrust into a very high-profile role very quickly, and it was quite important to turn that business around extremely fast.
Mm-hmm.
There were many things that played into, me then leading that business and having to get turnaround investors involved. And it was an extremely fun process. So my first kind of initiation into the world of work in London, and I was very young and fresh faced then, propelled me into something I was not prepared for, but we actually turned that business from a minus 600k EBIT business to a 3 million or plus 3 million EBIT business within a 5-year period. And I essentially used the profits from that organization to start a marketing agency, which was extremely close to my heart, working with very large B2B brands. And scaling that, it was actually about 5 or 6 years in the end. And you mentioned a couple there. There were a couple of acquisitions along the way to kind of increase the business
Mm-hmm.
size, but ultimately it was one business. And primarily that was a brand and content agency. Its peak got to about 80 people, mainly focused in B2B, working with really large B2B brands. But I learned loads, not only doing that, running a service-based business where, it's all about the people. You're selling people's
Mm-hmm.
time, which is a really interesting thing in itself. And then when you're acquiring businesses, I've learned how not to acquire businesses, I must say, which we could probably get into today.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also set up a bootstrapped cocktail business that went gangbusters and probably has aged me about 30 years in the meantime. And I don't think I'll ever do it again. And that sold last year. We got it to about 1 million turnover, and that was tough. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind. And now fast forward to now, myself and my business partner, Hugo, we run a business called Founders Capital, and Founders Capital invests into what we think are epic founders. So we've got a methodology to invest in epic founders. We deployed about £5 million last year. And we've invested at pre-seed stage, seed stage, Series A, all the way up to pre-IPO businesses in Discord and OpenAI. So, a crazy different type of organizations. And I love it. I love working with founders to help them build their business and investors to invest in the next big thing. Yeah.
Awesome. So, I mean, there's lots to unpack there, right?
Yeah,
so
sorry.
let's just go. No. I think that's a great beginning, just to give an overview, and we can dive into a few of those things. So, I think one thing that's always interesting to me, obviously, you're the kind of person who's, I mean, an overachiever, clearly, right? And I think that's, if you talked about your job, the first kind of publishing business that you worked in, and where you got to a leading role very quickly. what do you think? So, probably there was somebody in that organization who thought that, Rich is really good, or Rich has what it takes. Is that, what was it that, got you to you were a managing director of that, or was the role that you got to?
Yeah, well, I think ironically in that instance there wasn't much other choice given the circumstances that prevailed. But I had very supportive investors that came into the business and put their arm around me. A young 21-year-old at the time.
21.
And yeah, very, very young. I know, crazy. But I think the great thing about my experiences is I've managed businesses in different ways, right? So you go from a turnaround business, number one, which requires a very specific skill set to turn a business from the red to the black, and I absolutely had to be nurtured through that, right? Because to be thrust in that world and managing every penny of cash, and you are managing a P&L, is very different to venture-backed businesses where they don't care about burn in some instances, right? So I went from that to then starting an agency where we had a bit more cash to play with. It was more growth focused than turnaround focused, and we could focus on building rather than protecting and making sure the boat was still floating. And then I've also had experience of starting a bootstrap startup that was a consumer business which needs to be managed in a completely different way to a B2B business. So I think rather than someone sees a skill set, and I think that those skill sets probably were drive, tenacity, and never say die attitude. I skipped uni, so my career started at 16. I had a 5-year stint in a holiday park in the New Forest, where I learned a tremendous amount, and basically I was the MD's pet project, or protege, whatever you'd prefer. And that gave me a very well-rounded experience, to be really honest with you. On a Monday I was working with housekeeping to change beds, and on the Tuesday I was working with guest services, and on the Wednesday I was in the pub. And what that did is it gave me a very solid grounding as to how businesses should operate. There's a crazy story behind that time, but that might be one for another day. But what it definitely did do is it enabled me to understand what it takes to sell and what it takes to make profit, and why that's so important for a growing business. So I think I took those things, albeit at a very small scale, back home into my career in London. And for whatever reason in my career, I've always had a bit of a chip on my shoulder. If someone tells me I can't do something, I will absolutely prove them wrong, which probably has happened on multiple occasions. So, yeah, I don't know whether it's one thing, but that mixed with a degree of humility along the way. You never know everything, and you need to surround yourself with people that know a lot more than you do. It wasn't just me running these businesses; it was a whole team of people that helped propel them to what they became.
Interesting. So first time when we spoke last week, I like one of the first things that I would, when I met you and first few minutes when we spoke, I would describe you as intense, and that's and I mean that in a good way. And I see that in a lot of founders. It's like there's certain energy, and you just like jump right into it, and it's like here's the things that need to happen. And were you always like that? Would you say?
I would say so. Look, I've always been quite highly strung, and sometimes that's a real positive. I make decisions on emotion, which I've obviously had to temper over the years. I think the important thing is you recognise when it's right to make those decisions on emotion and when it's not. But intensity can be construed in different ways. I think it's also different when we're speaking here over Zoom than you are in person, right? I think the sales in me has always been able to read rooms extremely well when I'm in person. And I think that that's quite an interesting trait, right? Because I do think that the intensity can be dialed down depending on who you're speaking to, and you know, the type of person that is at the other end of the table. But it might come across extremely intense on the other end of a camera, because, you know, you can't see as much as you can in person. I don't know.
No, again, I didn't mean that in a bad way. I always, or I usually appreciate intensity in people, because, like, you know, like we move forward. Typically, that's how I see it. Like, you go, yeah.
I think that I would say relentless. Like, you know, there's never a scenario where there's a mountain too big. You know, I'll always try to come up with ways to kind of circumvent that, or get as close to the top as we absolutely can. So, yeah, maybe it is a trait in a lot of founders. I think someone put it the other day. I hosted an event, and one of the panelists said that in founders, they look for founders that are cockroaches. It's not a term that I would use, but you know, it's that kind of like, always get up, never die, a little bit sneaky, but you know, they get to where they need to get to. So, yeah, potentially.
Yeah, I've heard of the cockroach term before. Yeah, slightly awkward word, but it makes sense when you explain it, right?
Yeah, an intense cockroach. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. And so, okay, and then you went on and you started your own agency. You used the capital from the previous company or the previous role. You started your agency, and that was growing. I mean, it seems like that was growing really fast, right? So you had like 70, 80, maybe more employees after 3 years or so. All right, before we continue, I want to take a second to talk about our sponsor. I've always been saying that one of the best ways to learn about business is by working closely with a smart and successful entrepreneur, and this might be your opportunity. Our sponsor is a company called Judge Me. Judge Me is a Shopify product review plugin, and they're the #1 plugin on Shopify. They're literally, if you look at the Shopify App Store, they're in the first spot. They're bootstrapped, and they managed to outcompete other companies that raised hundreds of millions of dollars by just being smarter and building a better product. They were started by PJ, who was also a guest on the Founders Lounge, episode 54, so I recommend you to check it out. They recently moved their headquarters to London, and they're looking for smart people to join them. They're looking for product managers, engineers, and they're looking to fill other roles as well. So check out careers.judge.me and see if you find any role that you like and apply. So that's careers.judge.me. Now enjoy the rest of the episode.
Yeah, it was. Obviously, it helps with a bit. It helps with a bit of cash. It helps with good relationships to bring clients in when you're running an agency pretty swiftly. The downside of running an agency is, especially now, you're at zero nearly every year, right? The retained relationships aren't what they used to be, and therefore, if you're running an agency, it's a service-based business. You're selling people's time. It's really difficult to scale. So, you know, we needed to be mindful of that, you know, and there's a very different environment to that of running a tech business with MRR and ARR. But the one great thing about agencies is if you manage them correctly, they are very highly profitable. It's just that it actually does take a lot to get over. I would say agencies with 20 plus employees need to be managed in a completely different way to under that. And, you know, there aren't that many of them. There are a lot of agencies in the world, but not many can break that glass ceiling. So, yeah, it was a very interesting time, to say the least. That being said, I'm now no longer in agency world, and there is a reason for that, right? Like, I never thought of myself as an agency guy for the whole of my my career. I loved it whilst I was doing it, but there was always itches that needed to be scratched away from marketing, to be really honest with you.
So okay, a few questions there. Two questions actually. One is you said most of the agency owners, they never managed to get, or most of them never managed to get over the 20 headcount. What did you guys do differently, right? How did you manage to get over the number? And you grew pretty quickly, right? That's the first question. Then my second question is, you also said a lot of agencies are not, or if you don't manage the agency properly, it's not very profitable. And a lot of agency owners that I know, they don't run very profitable businesses, because they all say, well, you know, in order to scale, you need headcount. Headcount is expensive, therefore profit margins are thin, right? So what is the right way to do it, or a better way to do it?
Well, deliver results and charge more, right? But I mean, it sounds simple, but crucially, you need to understand who your customer is and who your customer isn't. A lot of the agencies, because of the way they work and the fact that they have high headcount and they need to make sure that they're covering those costs on a monthly basis, start to chase revenue that they should never chase. So it's like, you know, a SaaS business not listening to their customers, or listening to half of their customers' needs and not absolutely narrowing down their ICP, right? It's the same thing with an agency. I think that every agency should have a discipline, and they should exercise that discipline extremely well and deliver great results for their customers. And agencies should be targeting different individuals in different types of business, targeting different, you know, end customers. We at my agency were very, very focused on helping brands engage the C-suite, and we didn't even, you know, care about the broad C-suite. It was mainly, we'll help you engage 250 CIOs at FTSE 500 companies. It was extremely
so very
targeted.
specific.
Which, you know, when you go up further up the food chain, it means that the average contracts are a higher value, which means that, you know, 1 or 2 sales off the back of the work that you do for them actually delivers very, very significant results. But I think that crucially, it's about understanding who you're working with and what success looks like for them, and nailing it with 2 or 3 core customers and using them to shout and scream from the rooftops to kind of act as a flywheel to get more customers through the door. But it, you know, in answer to your question, the reason why a lot aren't maybe doing that is because the day-to-day needs of the business mean that you chase the wrong type of revenue, which is obviously not fantastic.
Another thing that's interesting there, so I know that, because in the end, I think there are 2 agencies, right? Alan and SectorLight.
Yeah, so SectorLight was an acquisition, yeah.
Yeah. And okay, and Alan was the first one, and with one of the, I think with SectorLight, you were actually working with clients with like very, very luxurious and presumably difficult, or maybe not difficult, but clients with very high standards, very high expectations, right? I think the Shard and some institution from the Palm in Dubai, and those are some of the most luxurious buildings in the world, right? But maybe one step before that, right? How, if you want to work with high value clients, how do you actually start with that? Because, and maybe your previous career helped you with that, right? I'm not sure. But I think something that happens to a lot of people in the beginning, they don't have either the confidence, or they just don't know how to even go after those types of clients, right? Because it seems more difficult. It's like, it's easier to go to the local small business owner and say, hey, you know, we're going to do this marketing campaign for you or something. But it appears much more difficult to close a deal with the Shard.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is you start, the further up the tree you start, the easier it is to get, you know, other like-minded brands and customers. You know, by starting low, obviously it's important maybe to get cash through the door, but it could also severely hamper your prospects in the mid to long term. And I think that sometimes, again, it goes back to what are you chasing and how are you chasing it, right? If you set your stall out to work with a certain type of customer, you might get known for working with that certain type of customer. The bigger the business you work with, they're going to want to look for credibility. And if you don't have that credibility to begin with, but you're starting an agency, the way you should get around that is, and this is quite different for me because that business in particular we acquired, right? So I actually wasn't that entrenched in that world to begin with. But the way that I would approach it, if I wanted to work with a certain type of customer, but I didn't have the portfolio to do so, I would basically piece together a team of people that do have that portfolio as, you know, freelancers or partners, and give them a significant revenue share to begin with. But the contract is with you and your organization. So, you know, you're bringing in a team of people that will have gravitas and credibility with the target audience that you're wanting to go after. And once you've done a couple of projects, you might not make much money on those projects, to be clear, but it's not about that. It's about the experience and the ability to say that you've then delivered successful campaigns for those said brands to then wheel out for other brands, and then you don't need the freelancers or they become employees, whatever. And that's the way that I would approach these types of things. But crucially, and this isn't an agency podcast, so I don't really want to. And also, it was yesterday for me. It's not tomorrow, if you like. Yeah. But the one thing I would say is, if anyone is thinking about starting an agency or struggling to get out of a certain type of customer, you have to critically evaluate who you are and aren't working with, and you might need 6 more months of working in the trenches to get actually working with the types of customer you want to.
Okay, makes sense. Right, and then you sold the agency, right? After a few years, can you tell what was the story there, and how old were you roughly, if you can share that?
28, 29.
Okay.
I exited to my my shareholders. It was something that was in the works for a 2-year period. The issue with agency world is if you sell out of the 4 walls of your organization, you get tied into very lengthy earnouts. It wasn't really for me because I'd kind of fallen out of love with it and kind of wanted to do what I do now. I couldn't imagine me signing up to work with a huge agency group, which is normally what happens with agencies when they get to a certain size. The easy exit route is to sell to a bigger group, but you'd be tied into a 3 to 5 year earnout. And I'm not really a corporate guy, as you could probably tell. They might not be able to deal with my intensity. I don't know. But so yeah, it kind of worked for everyone. But we worked up to it for a while. There was numbers we needed to hit, etc. And we got to a place that worked for everyone. And I could go and make cocktails and get angry with that as well.
So cocktails. That was the next thing then.
Yeah, so that was started before. In lockdown, it was I was invested into a cocktail business, and the first lockdown was about to kind of come into effect, and we were sitting around the board table, and I said to them, they sold to bars and restaurants, and they sold like mixes, like espresso martini mix, passion fruit martini mix, to restaurants. And those restaurants then added the vodka and shook it up and presented it to the customer. And I said, you need to take this direct to the consumer because they're going to be at home, and you want to put alcohol in it because they're going to want to drink, because we're in for a rocky ride. And they didn't want to go direct to consumer, and they didn't want to deal with alcohol. So I said, I want my money out. Obviously, there wasn't any money to take out. So instead of taking my money out, I took stock from the business. And I said, I'll show you how it's done. A bit silly of me. And Boxtails was formed. And it took a while to get an alcohol license and build the brand and come up with the recipes. And so I had about, I can't remember what it was, about 3,000 litres of espresso martini and passion fruit martini mix in a lockup in Somerset. And when I was ready to launch the brand, I opened this lockup only to find all of the IBCs that they were in, the big plastic things. You normally see them on farms where they're like troughs for cattle to drink out of once they finish their life holding something else, right? And these IBCs had exploded. So I had 20 grand's worth of fruit juice, effectively, had just exploded because it had gone out of date. So what I didn't realise is, if you make cocktails, it only becomes ambient if you add alcohol to it, and it's a certain ABV, and then obviously it's got a completely different shelf life because it's alcohol. Whereas if it stays as fruit juice, it expands and the air gets to it and it's no good, right? So that was a baptism of fire, realising that. But we pressed ahead anyway, launched Boxtails. It turned over 150 grand in its first month of trading. But that was because it was lockdown. So I had this business that was the most volatile business you could ever imagine, because as we were going in and out of lockdowns, it was trading up and down, up and down, up and down. So, I had staff base to cater for one demand, and then it went down to, 60% lower and then 150% up, and it was all over the place. So managing cash, managing product, managing people was an absolute nightmare. And we had 3 years of trading where there was many inconsistencies. And I wasn't a cocktail guy. I wasn't even a consumer guy, right? So there were so many learnings that were made over that period of time. But we got through. We never took a pound of external capital. I had to put a bit of cash in, but always took it back out. And we got to a place where, in the end, it was a very nice business. And then, it was making good turnover and it was profitable. And yeah, that we sold that only 4 or 5 months ago.
So, I mean, yeah, that's a pretty good result in the end. I mean, as you said, you went into something you didn't know anything about. It was the extremely turbulent times in all possible, ways. And then, yeah, as you said, the business was actually profitable.
No, it was nice and profitable. Yeah, it was good profit. I mean, the issue with alcohol is the duty. Anyone listening to this that is involved in drinks business or alcohol business, they'll understand the perils of dealing with alcohol duty. Cut a long story short, I basically was overexposed with the amount of alcohol I had in bond, which is basically you suspend paying duty until you sell that product. And my manufacturer one day went bust. So overnight we had to find a heck of a lot of money just to keep the business going. So I had access to that alcohol. Otherwise, God knows where it would have gone. It would have been in the hands of the administrators, etc. So there's many things to consider with alcohol, licensing, bonding, just general production, the supply chain, when you get your lime juice from Mexico and your tequila, obviously from Mexico as well, and you get your rum from an amount of your rum from the Caribbean, it's insane, right? Like you're just managing a massive beast. And I'm sure lots of businesses have those challenges, but it was definitely something I wasn't quite prepared for when I signed up to just, starting a cocktail business.
How do you approach this kind of situation? So, when you go into a new business, and especially in a space that you know nothing about, right? And there's all these specifics that you just told me about. And obviously, sometimes you just run into problems and you're like, well, shit, how do we do this? And probably some people have solved it before, but I don't really know how to approach it. How do you think about it? And then how do you approach solving those kind of problems?
Yeah, I mean, look, running a business kind of throws up a challenge every day, right? And the traits of a fantastic founder is how you manage through those issues. And to be clear, you won't always have all the answers, but it's about how you find those answers. So how do you delve into your network to ensure that you find someone to find those answers or help guide you through certain processes? But for me, the key thing was I make quick decisions. I know that, but it's about knowing when you think that quick decision is the right decision to make because of the impact it will have on the business, and when it's the wrong decision to make so quickly, maybe sleep on it for a few days because of the impact the wrong decision might have on the business. And also scenario planning, just thinking through the way you can solve problems and how solving those problems will have a kind of impact on the business. Runway was always an important thing in terms of the amount of stock that we were holding, seasonality, these types of things. How can you mitigate as much risk, and how do you always make sure the customer gets the best version of the business? I think that for me was always the most important thing for any of the businesses that I've worked in and for any of the businesses we invest in. It's making sure that the customer gets what they think they're signing up for and they feel delighted enough to keep coming back to that business. And over communicate. Always over communicate. If you have any problems, over communicate with staff and over communicate with customers. It's always the way.
I've heard it also often because also people forget or people don't hear what you said. People don't understand what you said. And by over communicating, sometimes you feel like you've said the same thing 10 times already, but somebody's going to hear it for the first time, or maybe they're going to understand it for the first time. And yeah, about decisions, I've heard about this concept of, is it type 1 and type 2 decisions or whatever? One of them are reversible and the others are unreversible, right? And the reversible decisions, it's typically good if you just make them as soon as possible and as quickly as you can. Some people just set themselves like a 5-minute rule or whatever. I'm going to decide on the reversible decisions within 5 minutes, and you decide, you move on. If you're wrong, you're going to learn. If you're right, good, we move forward. And then there are irreversible decisions, and those are the ones that you might want to sleep on a little bit, or do some little bit additional research, discuss with somebody to help decide on that, right? Because it's potentially, almost nothing is irreversible, but some things can have pretty severe consequences, right? So
yeah, but understanding what what is reversible and irreversible is, I think we often do think as founders, though, a lot of decisions that are actually reversible are irreversible. And I think by trying to take a helicopter view as much as you possibly can as a founder or CEO, whatever, to ensure that you are assessing the situation at a macro level rather than in the weeds level, because there are a few times I think you could make decisions and think they are completely irreversible, but actually if you took that helicopter view, you'd realize that it's probably proportionately not as big a decision as you think it is when you're on the ground and in the moment.
And I just posted the other day a quote from Patrick Collision, one of the co-founders of Stripe, obviously multi-billion dollar, they were worth like 100 billion or something, I don't know, very large amounts of money. And he said, yeah, you're probably better off if you make twice as many decisions twice as fast, rather than taking longer to think through it. Probably the end result is going to be better if you just take more decisions. Obviously more of them are going to be incorrect as well, but you're just going to move forward and actually take decision, because not deciding is also a decision, right? Until you decide, things are stuck and going in a certain direction, or just not moving where they're supposed to. Right, okay. And then Founders Capital now, so that's been going on for since last year?
Yeah, it's been about 12 months. I mean, Hugo and I have been personally investing in businesses for about 3 years. But we've got a founders community of about 350 founders, and realised that it was quite good deal flow, because we saw founders that we thought were very impressive, or they pivoted and were very backable. And when we were more liquid, we decided to back them. And what we realised is a lot of people in that founder community wanted to also piggyback and follow the decisions we were making from an investment perspective. So Founders Capital was born not really by us forcing it. It was born very organically and has grown very organically over the last year. But now it's an investment community that day by day is getting opportunities to invest in some amazing businesses, investing alongside some of the best VCs in the market, and that's a testament, I think, to the founders we've already backed and the noises we've made in the market, but us being able to move extremely quickly for certain founders. So yeah, we as Founders Capital, we've backed about 16 businesses now. And they vary at different stages and different types of organization, and we love working with founders to help them overcome their problems. I talk about that helicopter view. I think that having been in the trenches with the different types of businesses that I've run previously, it definitely helps us guide the founders as individuals. We don't know their businesses, we're not immersed like they are, but we can definitely provide some tangible value. And we don't, take silly fees or, hold them over a barrel to certain terms, because we're a group of founders that understand what it's like to found businesses, investing in other founders. I think it's a very nice thing. The founders love it because they feel like they're getting value from people that understand their world, right? So we thoroughly enjoy it. Our aim is to back as many great founders as we possibly can, and for them to feel that they can pick up the phone to us when things aren't going that well, to be honest with you. What I always say to the founders once we've backed them is, if you feel like you're writing your investment memo, your investor update, and there's things that are like the bad and the ugly, because there always is, or the not so great, and you feel like you can't write those things for whatever reason, give me a call and we can talk them through, and we'll help you kind of overcome those, so you do feel more comfortable to share that with a wider group of individuals. Because as investors, we need to recognize that a lot of the time these businesses are going through quite difficult periods, and we need to help the founders get through that as much as we possibly can, because we've made a pact to those founders as much as they've made a pact to us, because we've invested in them.
Yeah, I mean, just as you said before, right? Or as we talked about it, there are so many situations where it's hard and you don't know what to do, and it's I think it's really difficult if you don't have anyone you can rely on. I mean, for me, it's been always helpful to have my own network, and I joined some communities now recently where there's just a bunch of other founders, and it's just helpful, first of all, just seeing that at the end of the day, most of us have the same problems, and a lot of the people have already solved the problems that you're having. So, that's always nice. You get that shortcut when you actually talk to someone, for example, like in your case, right? Like, you've been in the business for so many years. So I can imagine that somebody who's starting their first startup, it might be very helpful just talking to you for, 10, 15 minutes, half an hour, present the problem, and you might know where to guide them, right?
Yeah, but crucially, I won't have all the answers, like they don't. And the key thing is can I open up a door that, is better equipped to answer questions than I am, For all of the experiences I've had, I've never run a SaaS business, for example. So there are things that, I don't know, but I can assure you I know someone that does. And I think that's the key thing. And that's our role as investors. It's to make sure that we are consistently opening up doors for our portfolio companies.
It was funny. So I don't know how much you want to talk about the whole super yacht thing, but I'll mention it a little bit because it was really funny. Quick story. So I'm in this WhatsApp group where there's a bunch of very wealthy, slightly older people. I don't even know how that's a separate story, how I ended up in there. But there's like this old money kind of people in there, who own like old school businesses. And I think it was like November, December last year, somebody posted in there, he said, my friend is renting a super yacht on F1 track in Abu Dhabi. If anyone wants to join, let me know. And I took a screenshot of that. I sent it to a friend of mine, who also quite an accomplished entrepreneur. And I said, look, man, life goals. We got to do this one day. And it was like half jokingly, right? I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. And he took it very seriously. He was like, yeah, man, let's do that in a couple of years. And I was like, okay, sounds good to me, right? Like, let's see. And we've talked about that later after that. And then, like 2 months later, I get on a call with you, and you're like, so we're chartering this super yacht. Like, we're inviting a few people. Do you want to join? I was like, oh my God, well, this manifested quicker than I was expecting.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that story, but it's a logical thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what I thought was really two things that I actually thought were really cool from that. First of all, it changed my mind. I was like, because the way how you're approaching the whole thing, I was like, yeah, you can actually just do that, right? That's not an unachievable thing at all. That's totally doable. That's thing number one. But the second thing that you mentioned was also really interesting, and I'm curious if you do that more often. You said, we were thinking, what would Alex Hormozi do? And we think that he would charter a super yacht. So we thought we'd do that as well. And I think that's a very smart way to think about it. It's like you look at somebody who's smart, and it's like, what would they do? Somebody who's like good at what you're trying to accomplish, right? And like, what would they do? Okay, then probably that's what I should do.
I don't think I can take the credit for being that crazy. I think my business partner Hugo, loves Hormozi and definitely thinks, how do we do something, but Hormozify it. Say he can take the credit for that one. But the idea for the yacht is we've got a week in Croatia, for people that don't know, for seasoned founders to join, and the reason is it sounds a bit elaborate, sounds a bit silly probably for some people, but Hugo and I met at Forbes 30 Under 30, and we met some incredible people on a Forbes trip that was hosted a few years ago in Israel. And what we realized is there's a very important way to build proper connections for entrepreneurs and founders that isn't attending a traditional conference. And the benefits that we saw were really small networking groups, like masterclass style sessions that you're getting real tangible value out with great speakers, and smaller networking groups. But the other thing is that you're, it's not a confined space, but we were always in a very particular space with the Forbes stuff, right? It was like, here you are, here's the venues, and everyone should really be in these places at these times. And sounds a bit prescribed, but this wasn't kind of conference halls. This was like small groups, and we thought, well, if we have a yacht, people can't get off. Number one, number two, we're going to get some great speakers, and we're going to keep it really intimate, and to make sure that the quality of guests is extremely high. And let's not forget here, we do have a group of founders that are, let's say between mid-20s to mid-40s, right? They like to have great dinners or network in the evenings and then have a drink or party, whatever. So we're also going to have that aspect, but it's going to be, network and learn in the days really thoroughly, party in the evenings. We've got some very special guests and very special surprises. And we're really looking forward to it. But, it's a packed few days. So we're doing 2 trips, 2 3-day trips, and 60 founders in total. So the entry requirements are you need to be turning over $1 million or have raised over $1 million at least. And, the demand is quite significant. But, it's not going to be for everyone. And we recognize that. And it'll be one event of many we'll run in the future.
I love that for so many reasons. Those kind of events changed my life. And I'm not sure how much I talked about that before, but one of the first events, different, but similar in a way, was actually, I was maybe like 21, 22 years old. And I went on a trip to Brazil. Somebody organized a trip for 100 students. I was a student at the time. And obviously 100 is like a pretty big number, but still a group where over a course of like a month or maybe 5-6 weeks, you actually get to meet a lot of those people. And it attracts a particular type of person, right? Not everyone will go for 6 weeks on a boat trip to Brazil. It's like you need to take a lot of time off. It costs some money. Some people don't even want to go to Brazil, right? There's a lot of reasons why you would not sign up for that kind of thing. And there was a bit of an application process or a selection process as well, right? Not everyone could qualify to actually go there. And it changed my life because everyone who was there was different than me. I felt like a lot of the people were way more successful than me. They were very ambitious. And I came back from that trip a changed person. And I changed a lot of things in my life after that trip because it had such a huge impact on me. And I realized that I want to do more events like that. They don't need to be 6 weeks long. They can be shorter, more intense. But I think the key part is a small group of people who are impactful in a certain way, right? People who you either, you learn something from them, they'll have an impact on your life, right? They're good at something, but maybe they're intense as well. That definitely helps. And ever since then, I've tried to do at least one of those kind of experiences every year because it's, for me, it was life-changing for sure.
Yeah, and you remember, and you've got something in common, and relationships forged over a period of time, 3 days is great. It's far greater than a couple of hours. And I think that can't be underestimated, and me the same, by the way. I didn't go into it too much detail, but those trips, that trip in particular to Tel Aviv, also changed my life quite considerably, and that was actually the inflection point where I realized I needed to change my personal work life, and actually, kind of make sure that I was doing something I really wanted to do, and that was invest in early stage founders. And I think it takes those types of events and meeting those types of people to help you make those decisions. But if you're on a boat with 30 people and 4 of those become great connections, and that the quality is extremely high and vetted, and people are all quite like-minded individuals, they're valuable connections, and that's what we want to be able to build. And we want people to look back at that event and go, I got some serious value from that, over and above some nice dinners and a few glasses of champers.
So you're focused on investing in founders now, and one thing that I quite like to talk about is, what makes a great founder and how can an individual as a founder perform as their best. So maybe we touch on that a little bit as well. And you mentioned that a little bit before, but maybe we can expand on it now. What do you think separates a great founder from an okay founder?
Tenacity and humility. They are the two most important traits that I will ever look for when I'm investing in them. Over and above you need to know your customer, you need to know their pain points, you need to know why the business serves those pain points, these types of things, right? That's about the business, and that's about how credible and competent they are about what they've built and what they're trying to achieve. But for me, the underlying traits that I look for always is, are they humble? Do they recognize what they don't know? And I'm sorry, I sound like I bang this drum a lot, but it's so important. And people will know me, will understand why I say this. Do they recognize where they have got gaps and where they can be filled? And, can they appreciate, that it's okay not to know everything. And that's fine. And I think that the next thing, tenacity, when I say that, people think, well, not every founder is a salesperson. It might be a technical founder, and or it might be an operational led founder. And what I'm saying here when I say tenacity isn't they must be a go-getter, outward, completely red salesperson, but they have to understand that being a founder means you are going to get setbacks, you're going to get knockbacks, you're going to get told that your idea is not fantastic and people wouldn't back it or wouldn't buy it. And you have to make sure that you are constantly getting back up and proving people wrong. And tenacious individuals in our portfolio, ones with humility and ones that have got a very specific plan and they execute to that plan on a day to day, week to week basis, are the most successful founders. So for me, humility and tenacity and a combination of those two is so important.
How much do you think that can be learned? If somebody is listening to this now and they're like, I wish I had more tenacity, is there something they can do about it?
Well, of course, when you're founding a business, it's tough, right? And we all go through ebbs and flows in our life where things feel like it's easy versus other periods they feel like they're really tough and the world's against you. I think it also has to do with mindset as well, right? When you think about someone being tenacious, that isn't someone sending. One thing I would caveat here is tenacity isn't pinging out 20 emails asking someone to invest in your business, or by the way, that happens a lot. Please stop sending those generic emails if you're listening to this and a founder. Tenacity is really properly thinking about why people would want to engage with you and what value you can bring them and they can bring you. And if you're tenacious, you are trying to unpick doors or trying to garner conversations or yield a benefit for your business in a way that is slightly different to everyone else. That's the way I would look at it. So if you're thinking I'm not the most tenacious of people, well, think about how you can approach things in your way that can be different to yield the result that you need to yield, whether that's finding investors, whether that's finding customers, whether that's finding suppliers, whether that's, building relationships in general with different stakeholders. There will always be a way to improve what you do and your output by being you just slightly differently. So that's the advice I would give. And it sounds a bit wishy-washy, but the point there is just try to come up with ways that you think actually benefit the person that you're trying to reach, and make sure that you are always thinking about your approach and conversations with people rather than having generic. Make sure you throw 3 darts and try to get those darts as close to the center of the bullseye on the dartboard as possible, rather than 50 darts all over the place. Because a lot of people think, well, I'm really tenacious, I've done all of this, look at my output today. And then, my response to them is, well, what has that delivered? How many shorts and t-shirts have that sold? How successful has that been for you? Because a lot of the time, the most tenacious people are just doing things in a way that other people aren't, and then they're getting better results for it.
How do you think about which areas perhaps you should be tenacious about? Or let me rephrase that question. So what you talked about now is like there are certain things where you have to, you have to be creative. You'll have to think about, how do we do this differently? How is this going to be our approach? And that requires time and focus and energy. And then there are certain things where you probably don't need to do that, right? Where it's better to just like stick to whatever already works for somebody else or whatever worked for you before, because you cannot spread your focus across everything that's happening in the business. So yeah, how do you think about that? What are the things where you should be creative and, be tenacious and like maybe think different? And what are the areas where it's just don't think about them too much, because maybe it's like a waste of time or a waste of your energy?
Well, I mean, it goes back to, what does a business need at that specific point in time? One thing I'd say is, don't overthink what the business needs. Like, you might always need funding, and that might be a really important piece to the puzzle. But firstly, reduce your burn, especially now. Reduce your burn as much as you possibly can if you're in a situation where you're running out of runway. Because, top tip, if the founders listen to this that are going out for investment, the closer you get to the end of the runway, the more likely it is you're going to get in a bit of trouble when you're trying to raise in this particular market. So make sure you're really concentrating on keeping the cost base to the absolute minimum and getting to profitability as quickly as you possibly can. But to answer your question, the business has different needs at different times. And your job as the founder is to recognize the push and pull factors and where you should be spending your time to deliver the most results. Now, I would argue that working with your customers is the most important factor to anything you would do, because if you understand your customers more, your product can be better. If your product's better, you're going to sell the product more. If you sell the product more, you're going to get more investors. You want to get to a place where you want investors to invest into you without you having to outreach to them. Now, I know it's very difficult, but it does happen. We look at businesses and we're like, we would like to be in this business even before doing DD on them. And obviously, things change once you do DD, but that is a thing. Optically, the way that brands kind of are perceived in the market is quite important. So I would say that, a lot of focus needs to be always placed on the customer. And I think a trap that a lot of founders fall into is they always think, well, I need more money to create a better product. Well, actually, you and I know now that there are lots of things you can do to create a better product that don't require much capital up front. You just need to think about them in a slightly different way. So, in order to answer your question, critically evaluate how you are spending your time and where you are spending your time, and make sure that it's actually moving the needle for your business. Because most of the time people think they're focusing on an area that is moving the needle because it's helping them in 2, 3, 4 months time, mainly fundraising. And actually, they could actually be more focused on the customer, which will end up with a flywheel of people wanting to invest more and actually make their job of fundraising 20 times more easy.
It's funny because it's a question that I ask myself probably like 20 times a day. What I'm doing right now, is that actually important? Is that actually impactful? Is that going to move the needle? Because it's very easy sometimes to fall into stuff that's easy and maybe even urgent, but it's actually, when you think about it, it's like, it's not important, right?
And it depends what you want to build, right? Because a lot has changed now as well in mindsets of founders. If you listen, I think you've had Matt Johns on the podcast, maybe, I don't know, but if you listen to people that have different views about how to build a business these days versus previously, I've got a lot of friends that are pro kind of building sustainable businesses without much VC funding, and actually, exiting for 30 to 50 million without going through various rounds of VC funding and getting diluted to high hilt is a real great success story now. And I do think you need to really critically evaluate what you're trying to build now versus then. We are not in the market we were 3 years ago, where you just get chucked VC cash, valuations are through the roof, and it was much easier to make mistakes with other people's money. That doesn't exist anymore. So there are different types of businesses you can build that will provide you with a different type of lifestyle and also stress level. And also evaluate if you're built to be a VC-backed founder versus a non-VC. Because personally, this is going to sound counterintuitive or a bit odd for me to say it, but I am not built to be a VC-backed founder. I'm a bit of a maverick. I'm a bit intense, whatever. No, but I see the world in a very particular way. I've had some health issues, and I've had to overcome those health issues and recognize that actually my life needs to have a certain balance with my career. And actually, as a result of that, I've chosen to build my career around the experiences I've had around my health and my previous, life, to build something that works for me. And I think that now more than ever, founders need to recognize that they need to really critically evaluate what they're trying to build and what they want to be at a very early stage. And not every founder has to be, Series I and getting diluted to the nth degree, and actually probably walking away with less than if they'd exited at before Series A, for example. There isn't a right or wrong there, by the way, but I do think it's important to recognize that there are very, very, very few unicorns, and it's okay not to be a unicorn. You need to build a business that's right for you and right for the market that you're in. I don't know if it answers your question, but there you go.
It's, opens a slightly different topic, but I 100% agree with that. I've tried a little bit of both as well, right? So my first real startup was where we went the venture route and we raised a little bit of funding. And to be honest, there were a lot of things that I didn't like about that. I mean, that's a whole big story. But after that, I said, I actually think my next business, I don't want it to be a VC-backed business. I think I want to go a different path. And I did. But again, and then, obviously there are times when I'm like, oh my God, no, look at all these huge stories in the media. We should do that. Like, it would be so awesome. Raise funding. You don't need to worry that much about, payroll, and there's money in the bank. So at least you can focus for 16 months on just building stuff. But it's different. Yeah. I think the stress that you gather, the things you need to be worried about are different. And yeah, as you said, there's no right or wrong. You just need to pick what's right for you.
There isn't, but it's much easier now than it was previously to create a business that is profitable, right? You've got more tools to your, you've got more tools at your fingertips. It's much easier with AI to run a business that, previously would have required a lot more headcount. I do think we need to think about things a lot more scientifically and granularly than we used to, because, the world of funding has changed. And honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think that founders, some of them in particular, might be living maybe in the past. And ones that raise rounds with very high valuations and, want to raise Series A or Series B now, they're in for a stark reality check in some instances where they won't be hitting the right notes to get those next valuations that they need. Which is where also we're going to see a very interesting market. And I just want to say that if you are one of those founders, it doesn't mean you failed in any way, shape or form, but it does mean you need to act to pivot and change the model of your business if you haven't already. The focus needs to be getting to profitability as quickly as you possibly can. And that might mean that you're not going to have the stardom of that next huge raise, but raising at a huge valuation adds more pressure more quickly. And if the businesses aren't set up in the right place, especially in this current market, it's going to be a bit of a problem for certain founders in certain industries.
Hmm. Okay. Two
On a more
questions for the
positive
end.
note.
To end on a positive note, two questions for the end. The first one, and you may or may not have an answer to this. You work obviously with a lot of founders and you invest in startups. You see a lot of pitch decks. Are there any ideas that you wish somebody would start working on? Any problems that you wish there's a founder would pick up and work on, or any opportunities that you're like, man, somebody just needs to take this opportunity?
I come up with loads all the time. Whether they're any good or not, I don't know, right? But it's just how my mind works. Are there any on the top of my head that aren't crazily abstract? I've been banning around a couple of things recently, but this is not going to mean much to many people. But one of the issues I have is around credit ratings. Like I think, for example, credit ratings are a bit odd. The three suppliers that underpin the way that credit works could do with an overhaul. If someone is looking into that industry and seeing different trends or ways of working, please let me know, because I'm quite enthused about it. Mortgages in general, how long-term kind of loans work, I think the market could be looked at, and I know there are a lot of startups that are coming up with very innovative ways to look at those, but they require regulatory changes. I mean, look, there's tons of potential ideas, and I'm sure there's much better brains to think about those than me.
Cool. Well, if anyone's listening, you do have a little bit of homework here to research if you're interested in any of those subjects. And to give everyone slightly more homework, perhaps, is there any one either book or course, or it may be an experience that had the biggest impact on your life that you think it could be useful for other founders, other than the Superyacht?
Yeah, Marketing the Bottom Line by Richard Hadler. It's a really good book. No, Alan Layton, Tough Calls. It was one of those books you read and then want to reread and reread and reread. Alan Layton, for those of you that don't know, was former CEO of Royal Mail, Asda, Swarovski, turnaround king, made big decisions look easy. The book's extremely well written. He's a great guy. It's definitely worth a read. And other than that, obviously, there's a lot of podcasts out there. We talk about Hormozi and the kind of US thought leaders around, running businesses and scaling businesses, etc. But yeah, I think the more you immerse yourself in the world of founders, I think the most I learn and I ever learn isn't through podcasts or reading articles or newsletters or courses, just not the way I work. It's through getting in a room with like-minded founders, understanding about their challenges and how they overcome them, and building up a roster of people that I could call upon when I need stuff. And I think that's for me the best way of learning by osmosis.
No, I agree. I completely agree with that. I think that's where you pick up the most of the knowledge, as well as just personality, and osmosis. I think that's a great word to describe it, actually. Nice. Now, for those who still do listen to podcasts and you listen until the end, I appreciate that. We got last year, the year before, this podcast got to the top 15% most shared podcast globally, which I was quite blown away by. But it also gave me confidence that this year we can get to at least the top 5%. So everyone who listened, I will super, super appreciate if you help me with that. You can either subscribe to the podcast or share it with somebody, or just give some kind of indication that you appreciated it, and that immediately helps spread the word and gets it shared, and we're going to get to the top 5% together. So thank you. And Rich, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I enjoyed learning a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, good. Sorry, it was a bit all over the place, but welcome to my life, eh?
That's what you get with the intensity. That's what it
is. Well, a pleasure. And obviously, if anyone's listening to this that wants to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Richard Hadler, and then obviously Founders Capital, founders-capital.com.
And that's going to be all linked in the show notes as well. So you can find it there. Nice. Thanks.